Some people don't control you with force. They control you with emotions. They make you feel guilty for protecting your peace, confused for speaking the truth, and emotionally exhausted for simply trying to be loved. The scary part is, many people spend years being manipulated without even realizing it. A toxic person can slowly destroy your confidence, your peace, your connection with Allah, while pretending to care about you. And by the time you finally notice the damage, your heart already feels tired, anxious, and emotionally lost. In today's video, you will discover the 7 psychological tricks toxic people secretly use to control others, and why protecting your heart is one of the most important battles of your life. Watch carefully, because one of these lessons may explain the emotional pain you have been carrying for years. 1. They use guilt to control you. One of the most dangerous weapons toxic people use is guilt. Not because guilt is loud, but because it works silently, slowly, deeply. A toxic person understands that if they can control your emotions, they can eventually control your decisions. And one of the easiest emotions to manipulate is guilt. They make you feel selfish for saying no to things that drain you. They make you feel cruel for protecting your peace. They make you feel responsible for fixing problems they created themselves. Whenever you try to establish boundaries, they suddenly act hurt, abandoned, or disappointed, so that you begin questioning your own actions instead of recognizing their manipulation. This is how many emotionally kind people become trapped for years. They are not staying because they are weak. They are staying because their compassion is constantly being used against them. Some people know exactly how to manipulate soft-hearted individuals. They know you hate conflict. They know you overthink everything. They know you fear hurting others. So they slowly train you to feel guilty anytime you prioritize yourself. The moment you need space, they accuse you of changing. The moment you protect your mental health, they call you selfish. The moment you stop tolerating disrespect, they suddenly behave as if you are the problem. And over time, this emotional pressure becomes exhausting. You begin apologizing for things that were never your fault. You start explaining yourself constantly. You feel anxious whenever you disappoint people, even if your decision was completely reasonable. Eventually, you become emotionally drained because your entire life revolves around keeping other people comfortable while silently neglecting your own heart. But Islam never teaches us to destroy ourselves emotionally for the sake of people. Even our beloved Prophet ﷺ had boundaries. He showed mercy, compassion, and kindness, but he was never emotionally controlled by people. There is a difference between kindness and emotional slavery. Many people confuse the two. A toxic person wants unlimited access to your energy, your time, your emotions, and your attention. They become upset the moment you stop sacrificing yourself for them. Why? Because your boundaries threaten the control they once had over you. And this is why guilt becomes their weapon. They want you to feel bad for resting, bad for changing, bad for healing, bad for growing closer to Allah, bad for protecting your peace. But listen carefully. Protecting your mental and emotional health is not selfish. Constantly carrying emotional pain for people who misuse your kindness is not righteousness. Allah did not create you to live emotionally exhausted just to satisfy toxic individuals. Real love does not manipulate you into feeling guilty all the time. Real love does not make you fear disappointing someone every second. Real love brings peace, security, honesty, and emotional safety. One of the greatest signs of emotional maturity is learning that saying no does not make you a bad person. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to distance yourself from people who constantly drain your soul. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stop feeling guilty for choosing yourself after years of abandoning your own heart. 2, they make you question yourself. One of the most dangerous psychological tricks toxic people use is making you question yourself. They do not always control you through shouting, anger, or obvious manipulation. Sometimes they control you by slowly destroying your confidence until you no longer trust your own thoughts, emotions, or instincts. At first, it happens subtly. You express your feelings and they tell you that you are too emotional. You explain why something hurt you and they accuse you of overreacting. You notice disrespect, dishonesty, or cold behavior, but somehow the conversation always turns back onto you. Instead of addressing what they did wrong, they make you feel like your reaction is the real problem. And slowly, this begins affecting your mind. You start replaying conversations in your head for hours. You begin questioning your memory. You wonder if maybe you are too sensitive, maybe you are expecting too much, maybe you are the difficult one. Over time, you stop trusting your own judgment because toxic people train you to doubt yourself every time you speak up. This is emotional manipulation at a very deep level. Because once someone controls your mind, they no longer need to control your actions directly. Your confusion will do the work for them. Many toxic people twist situations so skillfully that even when they hurt you, you somehow end up apologizing to them. They lie, disrespect you, ignore your feelings, or break your trust, but by the end of the conversation, you are the one feeling guilty and desperate to fix things. This creates emotional exhaustion that is very difficult to explain to others. Outwardly, everything may look normal, but internally, your mind becomes a battlefield. You constantly overthink. You fear expressing your emotions because you know they will dismiss them. You start suppressing your feelings just to avoid arguments. Eventually, you become disconnected from yourself. And this is exactly what toxic people want. Because people who doubt themselves become easier to control. When you no longer trust your instincts, you start depending on others to tell you what is true. You stop listening to the warning signs in your heart. Even when something feels wrong deep inside your soul, you ignore it because you have been conditioned to believe your feelings are invalid. But Allah created human beings with fitrah, an inner sense that recognizes truth, sincerity, and peace. Your heart notices things long before your mind fully understands them. That constant heaviness you feel around certain people is not something to ignore. That emotional confusion, anxiety, and tension are not signs of healthy relationships. A peaceful heart is one of Allah's greatest blessings. Toxic people often bring constant emotional instability. Around them, you never feel emotionally safe. You feel nervous before conversations. You overthink every word. You fear upsetting them. Even simple interactions leave you mentally drained. And sadly, many good-hearted people remain trapped because they keep hoping the toxic person will eventually change. They remember the rare moments of kindness and ignore the repeated emotional damage. They become attached to potential instead of reality. But people do not change simply because you love them harder. Real change only comes when a person sincerely fears Allah, takes accountability for their actions, and genuinely wants to improve themselves. Not when you endlessly tolerate disrespect. Never ignore what constant emotional confusion is doing to your soul. Healthy people may hurt you sometimes, but they do not consistently make you feel crazy for having emotions. They do not constantly invalidate your pain or make you question your worth. And one of the strongest things you can do for your emotional health is to stop asking toxic people for validation they were never capable of giving you in the first place. 3. They use silence as punishment. One of the cruelest psychological tricks toxic people use is silence, not peaceful silence, not the kind of silence that brings wisdom, calmness, or emotional maturity. This is a different kind of silence. It is silence used as a weapon, silence designed to create anxiety, fear, confusion, and emotional dependency. Toxic people understand something very dangerous. When communication disappears suddenly, the human heart begins searching desperately for answers. And this is exactly why they use silence to control others. They ignore your messages for long periods intentionally. They suddenly become cold after showing affection. They disappear emotionally without explanation. One day they act caring and emotionally attached, and the next day they behave as if you no longer matter to them. This inconsistency creates emotional instability inside you. You begin wondering what you did wrong. You replay conversations repeatedly in your head. You become anxious trying to fix a problem you may not have even caused. And slowly, instead of focusing on your own peace, your entire emotional state becomes dependent on their attention. This is not love. This is emotional manipulation. Healthy people communicate when something is wrong. Mature people express their feelings honestly. But toxic individuals often prefer emotional games because confusion gives them power. The more emotionally desperate you become, the more control they feel they have over you. And sadly, many people do not recognize this pattern until they are deeply emotionally attached. They mistake emotional inconsistency for deep connection. They confuse anxiety with love. They believe the emotional highs and lows mean the relationship is passionate, when in reality it is psychologically unhealthy. One of the reasons this manipulation becomes addictive is because the human brain becomes attached to unpredictability. When someone gives affection inconsistently, your heart starts craving their validation even more. You become emotionally trapped, waiting for the next moment of kindness, attention, or warmth. This is why some people feel unable to leave toxic relationships even when they know they are suffering. Because they are no longer attached to peace. They are attached to emotional uncertainty. The silence becomes painful because it makes you feel invisible. It makes you feel emotionally abandoned. And toxic people know this. That is why they use silence after arguments, after boundaries, or whenever they feel they are losing control over you. Instead of communicating maturely, they punish you emotionally by withdrawing attention and affection. And over time, this damages your self-worth. You begin chasing people who ignore you. You start working harder for basic respect. You feel relieved by the smallest signs of attention because emotional neglect has lowered your standards so much. But listen carefully. You should never have to beg for communication, clarity, or emotional safety from people who claim to care about you. Islam teaches mercy, balance, honesty, and compassion in relationships. The Prophet ﷺ never taught believers to emotionally torture one another through manipulation and cruelty. Real love does not intentionally create emotional confusion. Real love does not enjoy watching someone suffer silently. A person who genuinely values you will not constantly leave you feeling anxious, emotionally abandoned, or mentally exhausted. And sometimes the hardest truth to accept is this: some people enjoy being chased more than they enjoy genuinely loving others. They enjoy the control. They enjoy the emotional power. They enjoy knowing that your peace depends on their attention. But your emotional stability should never be placed in the hands of unstable people. Never allow someone's silence to make you question your value. Your worth does not decrease because someone chooses not to appreciate you properly. The problem is not always your heart. Sometimes the problem is that you are trying to receive sincerity from emotionally unhealthy people. And many people destroy their peace trying to force emotional closeness with individuals who are incapable of healthy love. Sometimes Allah removes people from your life because they were slowly destroying your inner peace more than you realized. Sometimes the silence that hurts you today is actually Allah protecting your future from deeper pain tomorrow. Because not every loss is a punishment. Some losses are mercy. And one of the strongest signs of emotional healing is when you stop chasing people who repeatedly use distance, silence, and emotional withdrawal to control your heart. A peaceful heart is too valuable to hand over to people who only communicate with you when it benefits them. 4. They play the victim after hurting you. One of the most frustrating psychological tricks toxic people use is playing the victim after they hurt you. This type of manipulation is deeply confusing because it completely reverses reality. Instead of taking responsibility for the pain they caused, they shift all attention onto your reaction. And before you realize it, the conversation is no longer about what they did wrong. It becomes about how you responded to it. They disrespect you, but suddenly you are too sensitive. They lied to you, but now you are overthinking. They ignore your feelings, but somehow you become the difficult person for bringing the issue up. This is emotional manipulation at a very deep level because it forces you to defend yourself instead of holding them accountable. Many good-hearted people fall into this trap because they naturally want peace. They dislike conflict. They try to understand others. They constantly self-reflect. And toxic people take advantage of this kindness by making them feel guilty for reacting to mistreatment. After enough manipulation, you begin apologizing for your sadness instead of addressing the behavior that caused the sadness in the first place. This creates emotional exhaustion. You spend hours explaining yourself, defending your intentions, and trying to prove that your feelings are valid, while the toxic person completely avoids accountability for their actions. They act wounded the moment you finally speak up for yourself. They make you feel cruel for expressing pain they caused themselves. And this is how many people slowly lose their voice in toxic relationships. They stop expressing disappointment, stop confronting disrespect, stop speaking honestly. Why? Because every conversation somehow turns against them. Toxic people are often very skilled at changing the focus of the discussion. Instead of talking about their behavior, they focus on your tone, your emotions, or your reaction. They say things like, "You're always angry. You're too emotional. You're impossible to please. You're making a big deal out of nothing. And eventually you become so emotionally drained that you stop trying to explain yourself at all. But silence born from exhaustion is not peace. It is emotional defeat. One of the clearest signs of manipulation is when someone consistently hurts you but refuses to sincerely acknowledge your pain. Instead of empathy, they give excuses. Instead of accountability, they give blame. Instead of change, they give emotional confusion. And sadly, many victims stay trapped because they keep hoping that if they explain themselves better, the toxic person will finally understand. But some people understand exactly what they are doing. They simply do not want accountability because accountability threatens the control they have over you. A manipulator fears truth because truth exposes behavior they worked hard to hide. That is why they constantly twist situations. They want you emotionally distracted. They want you doubting yourself. They want you focused on proving your innocence rather than recognizing their manipulation. And this can deeply damage your mental health over time. You begin questioning whether your pain is valid. You feel guilty for having emotions. You become afraid of expressing hurt because every emotional conversation leaves you feeling worse than before. But listen carefully. Your feelings are not automatically wrong simply because someone refuses to understand them. Islam teaches justice, honesty, and accountability. The Prophet ﷺ taught believers to admit mistakes, seek forgiveness, and treat others with sincerity. A person with true character does not constantly avoid responsibility while blaming everyone else for the damage they cause. And one of the strongest things a believer can learn is this: not every accusation deserves your energy. Some people are committed to misunderstanding you because misunderstanding you benefits them. If they acknowledge your pain honestly, they would also have to confront their own behavior. And many toxic individuals would rather protect their ego than protect your heart. This is why arguing endlessly with manipulators often leads nowhere. No matter how calmly you explain yourself, they continue twisting the narrative because confusion keeps you emotionally weak. Sometimes the most powerful response is silence, distance, and clarity. Not because you cannot defend yourself, but because you finally realize that protecting your peace is more important than winning arguments with people who refuse to be sincere. And one of the saddest truths in life is that some people will hurt you deeply, then act like the victim simply because you finally stop tolerating the pain quietly. Do not let their guilt manipulation blind you from reality. You are not a bad person for feeling hurt. You are not selfish for wanting respect. You are not cruel for protecting your emotional health. Sometimes the moment you stop accepting emotional manipulation is the moment toxic people begin calling you difficult. Not because you changed negatively, but because they lost the control they once had over your heart. And that loss of control often bothers manipulators more than the pain they caused you in the first place. 5. They isolate you from others. One of the most dangerous things toxic people do is isolate you from others. They understand that people become easier to control when they are emotionally alone. A person surrounded by sincere friends, loving family, wise advice, and healthy support is much harder to manipulate. But a person who feels isolated, emotionally dependent, and disconnected becomes vulnerable. And this is exactly why toxic individuals slowly try to shrink your world until everything revolves around them. At first, it may not seem obvious. They may act protective, concerned, emotionally attached. But slowly, subtle patterns begin appearing. They complain whenever you spend time with family. They become irritated when you talk to close friends. They create unnecessary tension around people who genuinely care about you. Sometimes they even make you feel guilty for giving attention to anyone besides them. And because you want peace, you slowly start distancing yourself from others without realizing what is happening. This manipulation is extremely dangerous because it often happens gradually. Toxic people rarely say directly, "I want to isolate you." Instead, they emotionally condition you over time. They create drama around your healthy relationships until maintaining those connections starts feeling exhausting. They may constantly criticize your loved ones. They may plant doubts in your mind. They may say things like, "They don't really care about you. They are jealous of us. You trust people too easily. No one understands you like I do." And slowly, your emotional dependence on them grows stronger. The more isolated you become, the more power they gain over your emotions, decisions, confidence, and mental state. This is why isolation is one of the strongest weapons manipulators use. Because when your entire emotional world revolves around one person, you begin fearing their absence more than your own unhappiness. And many people remain trapped in unhealthy relationships not because they are weak, but because isolation has made them emotionally dependent. They feel they have nowhere else to go emotionally. Their confidence slowly disappears because they no longer have healthy voices around them reminding them of their worth. Toxic people often dislike anyone who helps you think clearly. They become uncomfortable around people who encourage your healing, independence, growth, or emotional strength. Why? Because emotionally healthy people can often recognize manipulation quickly. A sincere friend may notice how exhausted you have become. A wise family member may notice your sadness. Someone close to you may recognize the emotional control you are too attached to see clearly yourself. And toxic individuals fear this. That is why they try to weaken those relationships before the truth becomes visible. Sometimes they create arguments before family gatherings so you stop attending. Sometimes they become emotionally cold after you spend time with others. Sometimes they make you feel disloyal for maintaining healthy friendships. And over time, you unconsciously begin choosing isolation just to avoid emotional conflict. But isolation slowly damages the heart. Human beings were not created to carry emotional burdens completely alone. Allah created people with the need for companionship, support, understanding, and community. Islam encourages righteous friendships and healthy relationships because the people around you influence your emotional, mental, and spiritual state. The Prophet ﷺ reminded us about the importance of good companionship because the people closest to you shape your heart more than you realize. A toxic person often wants to become your only emotional source because dependency increases control. The more dependent you become, the harder it feels to leave even when you are suffering deeply. And sadly, many people lose themselves completely in this process. They stop pursuing goals they once loved. They stop spending time with people who brought them peace. They stop expressing themselves honestly. Their entire emotional energy becomes focused on avoiding conflict and keeping one toxic person satisfied. Eventually, they no longer recognize who they used to be. One of the saddest parts of emotional isolation is that it slowly convinces you that loneliness with the toxic person is safer than freedom without them. Even when you are unhappy, disconnected, and emotionally drained, the fear of losing the relationship feels overwhelming because your emotional world has become so small. But listen carefully. Any relationship that requires you to disconnect from healthy people, abandon your peace, and silence your true self is not bringing you closer to emotional health. Real love does not isolate you from sincere people. Real love does not fear your support system. Real love does not punish you for having meaningful connections outside the relationship. Healthy people want to see you emotionally strong, spiritually grounded, and surrounded by goodness. Toxic people often want exclusivity because exclusivity creates emotional dependence. And this emotional dependence can quietly destroy your confidence over time. You begin doubting your ability to function independently. You fear making decisions without their approval. You become emotionally anxious whenever distance appears between you. This is no longer love. This is emotional control. Sometimes Allah allows certain relationships to expose how easily human beings can become attached to unhealthy emotional dependence. And one of the greatest forms of healing is rebuilding the connections manipulation tried to destroy. Reconnect with sincere people. Reconnect with family members who genuinely care about your well-being. Reconnect with healthy friendships that remind you of your value. Reconnect with your relationship with Allah. Because many people become so emotionally attached to toxic individuals that they slowly drift away from the peace only Allah can truly provide. And perhaps one of the strongest signs of emotional healing is when you no longer allow one person to become the center of your entire emotional existence. Your peace matters. Your emotional health matters. Your connection with righteous people matters. Do not allow toxic individuals to isolate you so deeply that you forget there are still sincere hearts in this world who genuinely want to see you healed, respected, and emotionally safe. Sometimes the first step toward healing is realizing that the people who truly love you will never force you to abandon yourself just to keep them comfortable. 6. They attack your self-worth. One of the most painful things toxic people do is attack your self-worth. They may not always destroy you through obvious cruelty or harsh words. Sometimes the damage happens quietly, slowly, and repeatedly until you no longer recognize the confident, peaceful person you once were. This type of emotional damage is dangerous because it affects the way you see yourself. And once a person's self-worth becomes weak, they begin accepting treatment they never would have tolerated before. Toxic people understand this very well. That is why they slowly chip away at your confidence little by little. Sometimes they mock your dreams. Sometimes they minimize your achievements. Sometimes they constantly compare you to others in ways that make you feel inadequate. Sometimes they dismiss your emotions, your intelligence, your appearance, or your efforts until you begin believing that nothing you do is ever enough. And over time, these small emotional wounds become heavy inside the heart. You start doubting your value. You stop speaking confidently. You stop expressing yourself honestly. You become afraid of criticism. You begin shrinking your personality just to avoid being judged or rejected. This is emotional destruction happening slowly. Many toxic people do not want you to feel strong because confident people are harder to control. A person who knows their worth is less likely to tolerate manipulation, disrespect, emotional games, or constant criticism, but a person who feels insecure becomes easier to influence emotionally. And sadly, many kind-hearted people do not even realize how deeply their confidence has been damaged until they find themselves constantly seeking approval from the same people hurting them. One of the clearest signs that your self-worth is under attack is when you begin feeling emotionally anxious around someone instead of emotionally safe. You overthink every word before speaking. You fear making mistakes around them. You feel relieved whenever they temporarily show approval because criticism has become so common that even basic kindness now feels rare and valuable. This creates unhealthy emotional dependency. You begin measuring your worth based on their mood, attention, or validation. If they praise you, you feel worthy. If they become cold, distant, or critical, you suddenly feel small again. And this emotional instability slowly drains the soul. Some toxic individuals constantly point out your flaws while ignoring your strengths. Others use sarcasm, humiliation, or subtle insults disguised as jokes. Some make you feel unintelligent whenever you express opinions. Others remind you of your past mistakes repeatedly so you never feel fully confident moving forward. And after enough emotional damage, many people begin believing negative things about themselves that were never true to begin with. They start believing, I am difficult to love. I am not good enough. I always disappoint people. Maybe I deserve this treatment. Maybe I really am the problem. This is how manipulation slowly changes a person's identity. But listen carefully. People who constantly make you feel worthless are not healing your heart. They are weakening it. Allah did not create you to live feeling constantly inadequate, emotionally small, or ashamed of your existence. Every human being was created with dignity. Every believer has value in the sight of Allah regardless of how people treat them. The world may criticize you. People may misunderstand you. Some may fail to appreciate your sincerity, but your worth was never created by human approval. And this is something many people forget after experiencing emotional manipulation for too long. Toxic individuals often make you feel as though love must be earned through suffering. They train you to believe that if you work harder, sacrifice more, stay quieter, or tolerate more pain, then maybe you will finally become worthy of respect and affection. But healthy love does not require you to destroy yourself to receive basic kindness. Healthy relationships do not constantly leave you feeling emotionally exhausted, insecure, or afraid of disappointing someone. A sincere person may correct you sometimes, but they do not continuously attack your dignity. They do not make you feel worthless simply to maintain control over you. And one of the saddest realities is that many people become so accustomed to emotional criticism that they begin rejecting genuine kindness when it finally appears in their life. Why? Because manipulation normalized pain for them. They become unfamiliar with emotional safety. When someone finally treats them with gentleness, patience, honesty, and respect, it feels strange because their nervous system became attached to emotional chaos. This is why healing takes time. A damaged self-worth cannot recover overnight. Years of criticism, emotional manipulation, rejection, and control leave deep scars inside the heart. Some people smile externally while internally carrying years of insecurity created by toxic relationships and painful words. Words are powerful. The way people repeatedly speak to you can shape how you eventually speak to yourself. And this is why protecting your environment matters so much. The people around you either water your confidence or slowly poison it. Some people inspire growth, peace, and emotional stability. Others constantly leave you feeling anxious, unworthy, and mentally exhausted. Pay attention to how your soul feels around certain individuals. Do you feel encouraged or constantly judged? Do you feel emotionally safe or emotionally drained? Do you feel respected or constantly criticized? Do you feel closer to Allah or further away from peace? These questions matter deeply because some people damage your self-worth so gradually that you do not notice how much of yourself you have lost until one day you look in the mirror and no longer recognize the person staring back at you. And perhaps one of the most heartbreaking things about low self-worth is that it often causes people to stay in situations that are destroying them. They settle for disrespect because they no longer believe they deserve better. They tolerate emotional pain because manipulation convinced them that their needs are unimportant. But your emotional needs matter. Your mental peace matters. Your dignity matters. Islam teaches believers to carry themselves with dignity and self-respect. The Prophet ﷺ never taught people to emotionally humiliate themselves for acceptance. True humility before Allah does not mean allowing people to constantly crush your spirit. There is a difference between humility and emotional weakness. A believer can be kind while still protecting their dignity, gentle while still having boundaries, loving while still respecting themselves. And one of the strongest moments in emotional healing is when you finally stop seeking validation from people who only feel powerful when making you feel small. Because some people criticize you not because you lack value, but because your confidence threatens their insecurity. Never allow toxic individuals to define your worth. You are more than the insults you heard, more than the rejection you experienced, more than the mistakes you made, more than the emotional pain someone caused you. Allah knows your sincerity even when people misunderstand you. Allah sees your struggle even when nobody else notices. Allah knows the battles inside your heart that you never explain to anyone. And sometimes the beginning of healing is learning to see yourself through mercy instead of through the cruel words of people who never truly valued your heart. One of the greatest acts of self-respect is distancing yourself from environments that constantly damage your spirit. Not every place deserves your presence. Not every person deserves unlimited access to your emotions. Because protecting your self-worth is not arrogance. It is emotional survival. And perhaps one of the most powerful transformations a person can experience is the moment they finally realize they no longer need to beg for love, respect, or validation from people who were committed to making them feel unworthy from the very beginning. 7. They keep you emotionally confused. Perhaps one of the most dangerous psychological tricks toxic people use is emotional confusion. This type of manipulation is extremely painful because it traps the heart in a constant state of uncertainty. You never fully know where you stand with them. One day they make you feel deeply loved, valued, and emotionally important, and the next day they become cold, distant, detached, or completely different. This inconsistency slowly destroys inner peace. The human heart naturally searches for stability, safety, and clarity. But toxic individuals often create emotional chaos intentionally because confusion keeps people emotionally attached. When someone is predictable and healthy, your mind remains calm. But when someone constantly changes their behavior, your emotions become unstable and you begin chasing answers instead of protecting your peace. And sadly, many people mistake this emotional instability for deep love. They think the emotional highs and lows mean the connection is powerful. They believe the unpredictability makes the relationship special. But in reality, constant emotional confusion is often a sign of emotional manipulation, not genuine love. One moment they give attention, affection, compliments, and emotional closeness. They make you feel important. They make you feel chosen. They speak beautifully. They promise consistency. They create emotional hope inside your heart. Then suddenly, without explanation, everything changes. Their energy becomes cold. Their communication becomes distant. Their effort disappears. Their kindness fades. And now your mind becomes trapped trying to understand what happened. You begin overthinking every interaction. You replay conversations repeatedly. You search for hidden meanings behind every message, every silence, every emotional shift. This is emotional exhaustion. Toxic people often know exactly what they are doing. They understand that uncertainty creates emotional obsession. When affection is given inconsistently, the heart becomes addicted to seeking emotional reassurance. Instead of peacefully enjoying love, you become emotionally trapped, chasing stability from someone who keeps taking it away. And over time, your emotional state becomes completely dependent on their behavior. If they are warm, you feel relieved. If they become distant, your anxiety returns. If they suddenly give attention again, you feel temporary happiness. If they disappear emotionally, your peace collapses again. This emotional cycle becomes deeply unhealthy because your happiness no longer comes from inner peace or your relationship with Allah. It becomes tied to the unpredictable behavior of another human being. And this is one of the most dangerous forms of attachment, because now your heart lives in survival mode. You stop feeling emotionally secure. You constantly fear abandonment. You become hyper aware of small emotional changes. Even simple delays in communication begin creating anxiety inside you. This is not emotional safety. This is emotional instability. Healthy relationships do not leave you constantly confused about your value. Genuine people may have flaws, difficult days, or moments of weakness, but they do not repeatedly create emotional chaos inside your heart. They communicate honestly. They bring clarity instead of confusion. They make you feel emotionally safe rather than emotionally anxious all the time. But toxic people often thrive on unpredictability because unpredictability gives them control. When you are emotionally confused, you spend more time trying to understand them than protecting yourself. Your focus shifts away from your own healing goals, peace, and spiritual growth. Your emotional energy becomes consumed by trying to decode someone else's inconsistent behavior. And this confusion can become deeply addictive. Many people remain emotionally attached not because they are genuinely happy, but because they keep hoping things will return to the good moments. They become attached to emotional memories instead of present reality. They remember the affection, the attention, the promises, the rare moments of emotional closeness, and they ignore the repeated anxiety, emotional pain, inconsistency, and confusion because they keep waiting for the good version of the person to return permanently. But one of the hardest truths in life is accepting that temporary kindness does not erase repeated emotional damage. Some people know how to give just enough affection to keep you emotionally attached while continuing to hurt you repeatedly. And this creates emotional imprisonment. You become trapped between pain and hope, between clarity and confusion, between emotional exhaustion and emotional longing. This instability slowly affects every area of life. Your concentration weakens. Your sleep becomes disturbed. Your anxiety increases. Your connection with Allah becomes weaker because your mind is constantly occupied with emotional stress. Some people become so emotionally overwhelmed by toxic relationships that they lose themselves completely. They stop enjoying life. They stop focusing on personal growth. They stop feeling emotionally present with family, friends, or even worship because their heart has become consumed by confusion. And perhaps one of the saddest parts of emotional confusion is that it often makes people blame themselves for another person's instability. You start thinking, maybe I'm asking for too much. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I need to be more patient. Maybe if I love them harder, things will improve. But love cannot heal someone who enjoys emotional control more than emotional honesty. A healthy person may unintentionally hurt you sometimes, but they do not consistently create emotional instability while refusing accountability. Toxic individuals often avoid clear communication because clarity removes their power. If they clearly told you where you stand, you might stop chasing them emotionally, but confusion keeps you emotionally invested. This is why they give mixed signals. They act interested, then distant, attached, then detached, loving, then emotionally unavailable. And every time you begin pulling away, they suddenly return with affection, again restarting the cycle. This emotional pattern can deeply damage self-worth over time because you begin believing love must always feel painful, uncertain, and emotionally exhausting. But Islam never teaches believers to live in constant emotional chaos. Allah wants peace for the heart, not endless emotional suffering. The Prophet ﷺ taught sincerity, honesty, compassion, and emotional responsibility in relationships. Real love should bring tranquility, mercy, and emotional safety. It should not constantly leave you questioning your value, your importance, or your emotional security. And one of the clearest signs that a relationship is damaging your soul is when your heart constantly feels restless around someone who claims to care about you. Pay attention to what your soul feels repeatedly. Not temporary excitement, not temporary attention, not occasional affection. Pay attention to the long-term emotional impact. Are you becoming more peaceful, more emotionally secure, closer to Allah, mentally healthier? Or are you becoming more anxious, emotionally dependent, insecure, and exhausted? These questions matter because emotional confusion slowly drains life from the heart. Some people become so accustomed to emotional chaos that peace begins feeling unfamiliar to them. Calmness feels boring because their nervous system became addicted to instability. This is why many emotionally wounded people accidentally continue chasing unhealthy relationships repeatedly. Pain became familiar. But familiarity does not mean something is healthy. Sometimes your heart becomes attached to what is hurting you simply because you spent too much time surviving inside emotional confusion. And this is why healing often requires distance. Distance from manipulation, distance from inconsistency, distance from people who constantly disrupt your emotional stability. Because healing cannot fully happen in the same environment that continuously destroys your peace. And perhaps one of the strongest forms of emotional maturity is learning to stop chasing clarity from people committed to confusing you. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to your emotions. Some people only enter your life to teach painful lessons about boundaries, attachment, self-worth, and emotional dependence. And while those lessons hurt deeply, they often push people back toward Allah in ways comfort never could. Sometimes Allah allows emotional confusion to expose how attached your heart became to human beings instead of to Him. Because human beings change, human beings disappoint, human beings fail. But Allah never abandons the hearts that sincerely turn back to Him. And one of the most healing realizations in life is understanding that your peace is too valuable to sacrifice for relationships built on confusion, inconsistency, and emotional instability. You deserve honesty. You deserve clarity. You deserve emotional safety. You deserve relationships that do not constantly make your heart feel heavy. And perhaps the moment your healing truly begins is the moment you finally stop romanticizing emotional chaos and start choosing peace over emotional addiction. Because real love should calm your soul, not constantly confuse it. Not every person who enters your life is meant to stay forever. Some people come as blessings, and some come as lessons. And sometimes the most painful relationships teach you the most important truths about self-worth, boundaries, emotional healing, and your relationship with Allah. Never ignore the people who constantly disturb your peace, confuse your heart, or make you feel emotionally small. A healthy soul cannot grow in constant emotional chaos. Always remember, the people closest to you will either bring you closer to Allah or slowly pull you away from peace. Protect your heart carefully. Protect your mind carefully. And never feel guilty for walking away from what is destroying your inner peace. If this video touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to the Eman chapters, like this video, and share it with someone who may silently be struggling with emotional manipulation. And until next time, may Allah protect your heart from toxic people, heal every hidden pain inside you, and fill your life with peace, sincerity, and emotionally safe souls.